Welcome back to the first team. Joe DeLeone and Ryan Roberts. Today we are going to be almost wrapping up our summer scouting. Today we've got safeties. We're trying to power through these. Probably going to do a couple in between week 1 and week 2. A couple of outstanding issues got in the way. Me getting sick. Ryan was away for the wedding. That slowed us down a little bit. That's not a reason why. That's not a reason why. We were gonna get everything. I'm just saying that. And also I was moving, so this just ended up being a slow ass tough summer for us to schedule, but nonetheless, we power through, and we've got safeties. Ryan, the safety class, I like it at the top. I think that there's some unique guys for specific roles that we can call on them to do, and a number of these guys that we're going to get to amongst like the top 4, I think there's some really unique athletes, but outside of that, it's a little bit of a pick your poison on who you want to go with in the back end of your
I feel like
top 10.
I like this class a lot more than you do, Joe. I don't know, man. I am 20 deep, okay? 20 deep. Wow. And I like this class a lot, man. Like, I'm just looking through my notes, like literally in front of me. And if anybody sees me kind of reach over the screen, I got a little bit of a different setup now. So like my thing is kind of above the monitor, which is kind of hilarious. But I think this class is exceptional. I think that the top is very good. Probably the best top that we've had in several years. And I think this depth is as good as at least a couple of the better safety classes we've had in recent years as well. So yeah, man, I'm in on the safety class. Joe, I was talking with someone earlier and I'm just like, the offensive class in 2025 does not look great right now outside of running back. Like, it really doesn't. Thank God for this defensive class, man, because we got a corner class this year. We got a safety class. We got a defensive line class. Like, defense really saves 2025 right now.
Well, we're going to dive deep on today's show. We're going to get to know some of these guys. You've watched a lot more than I have. I've been just kind of scraping by trying to get as many in amongst being sick this week. So everybody, folks, bear with me trying to recap some of these. I'll let you fill the wonderful space, Ryan, as you always do. I'm going to start us off with my number 10 through 6. At number 10, I scouted this guy, just some context, scouted this guy through RPM, and I really liked him, and maybe I'm being a little bit too bullish. It does not sound like he's going to play this year, which kind of sucks, but I'm throwing him into the mix here. You know who I'm going to say?
Yep. Cole Wisniewski. Yeah.
Yes, Cole Wisniewski from North Dakota State. Number 9, I had Keon Sav, now of Alabama, previously of Michigan. Number 8, Rod Moore from Michigan. And number 7, Lathan Ransom. And then number 6, Sebastian Castro from Iowa.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, I guess I honestly didn't even grade Wisniewski just because I had my grade from him from this past season, but I didn't go back and do like a legitimate deep dive into Cole Wisniewski. FCS guy on this channel, right? Which I know a lot of people follow this channel for the FCS content, which is hilarious. So highlight Cole Wisniewski for us, Joseph.
Massive frame. I think he was listed at 6'4", but probably a little bit of hair underneath that. He's obviously not Kyle Hamilton, but the FCS version of him and the way that he was used at North Dakota State, I think you can see the parallels. It sucks that they're not going to have him this year because he was just such an important player for them on the back end. Right. The range that he was able to play with, not crazy impressive because of who he's tracking down. Like, he's tracking down teams that are running the ball pretty heavy in between the tackles. So it's not like he's really asked to cover deep on deep balls and pick the ball off out of the air and all those kinds of things. But for his size, the way that he's able to cover ground, I think was pretty impressive. And if he was able to play this year, I kind of just left him in because I wasn't able to get to as many guys as I wanted to this week. And I just had a pretty good grade on him. If he was able to play this year and he was somebody that Jim Nagy, I saw, was kind of giving him a little bit of love, or maybe it was Galco from the East West Shrine game. One of them was giving him love. If he got to play this year, I wouldn't have been surprised if he wouldn't have been a riser, if he wouldn't have had a good combine, if he wouldn't have been one of those players that people would have been pushing the narrative for him because he's this great athlete that played at North Dakota State.
The funny part about Wisniewski is that although he plays a lot of like single high and he's a true safety in North Dakota State system, and he plays some like overhang at times depending on like what the formation and team that they're playing against is. Funny enough, though, Joe, it's going to be an interesting conversation whether it's 2025 NFL draft or 2026 NFL draft if he does take a extra year, because I think he does have a 6th year on the table if he wants to take it. But the question that I'm going to have, and for a lot of people I think are going to have, is I think Jim Nagy, when he tweeted out the watch list or Senior Bowl released their watch list, Wisniewski was on it, but he was listed as a linebacker, which I found very interesting, right? And so
part of me does think that translation does end up happening.
I kind of really like him because I think he's definitely a draftable athlete, a football player. I mean, we literally put him through for a recommendation, but I mean, special teamer, dime linebacker at worst, right? And then you see how his body develops. Like I do like Wisniewski a lot. One guy that you mentioned before I hit my 10 through 6 that came in at number 12 for me that I like, but I have a little bit of reservation on. Just Keon Sabb for me from Michigan that transferred to Alabama. Joe, I think he's a good athlete. He's just one of those guys that I can't skate over athlete part. Like he's a very good athlete for the position, but it's just like the lack of sample size. You know, outside of like the Washington game, it's like he didn't play a ton. You know what I mean? So it's a little bit of a projection, I guess, for Sabb.
Yeah, I'm curious. New setting at Alabama, how that translates for him. He's one of those guys that they really needed safety help. They needed secondary help. They needed to replace a number of guys from last year. So, right. So like him springing into that role in the SEC, I'm hoping that it does translate. He was very highly sought after the second that he jumped into the portal. Who was your 10 through
number
6?
Number 10, I have Sebastian Castro from Iowa, the nickel that I think is more of a safety type. Number 9, I have Xavier Watts from Notre Dame. Number 8. Wow. Yeah, I know some Notre Dame fans are not going to like that one. Number 8, I have Xavier Nwankpa from Iowa. Number 7, Lathan Ransom from Ohio State. And number 6, I have Jeremiah Cooper from Iowa State.
So it's sounding like you're going to have a bunch of guys I didn't get to watch this week.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like that's probably going to end up happening. Castro, though, I really want to talk about. We're going to get to Watts in my top 5 because he did end up making my top 5, but not very excitedly being placed there. Castro, though, you mentioned he's more of a safety just because he doesn't really have the length or the range to play as like a full-time slot corner, but God, man, he is strong. He is thick. He can really redirect guys with his power, and he's a great freaking tackler, man. He's going to fill a role for a team that just falls in love with his just.
I mean, so he's listed, I think, at like 5'11", but he's probably 5'10", maybe even a little bit under, and he's 200 plus pounds. Like he's a pretty physically dense kid overall. He actually, he plays a lot of safety because at least in the couple games that I saw, Joe, like he's playing nickel. He's the starting nickel, but then there are certain formations where they do rotate him back and they bring in a different kind of overhang player, which is kind of just interesting. So we have seen him at safety a little bit, but I think that there's a couple teams that might look at him and say, like, I think that you could still play nickel in our system because it's a little bit more zone heavy. It's a little bit more, we just want you to kind of be an enforcer, to be able to be that alley player for us in certain instances, right? So I think that there's some potential there, but like I watched him and I'm just like, you could be an okay starting nickel in the NFL in a certain system, or you could potentially be a good safety, right? Or maybe a plus safety eventually. So it's a little bit of a projection, but I do really like the traits that he brings to the table because you talked about that physicality. He might be possibly the smartest player on this list for me overall. Like he always just seems to be in the right spot. He understands how to read routes in front of him. So yeah, he's going to be playing the NFL for a long time. Just a question of where scheme fit and position fit is best for Sebastian Castro.
Yeah, the traits don't really lend him. It kind of stinks when you look at a guy like that. You kind of hope that if he's just a little bit bigger, what his impact could really be. But he could be one of those guys that you talk about as like maybe the 5th or 6th most important player on a defense, but just a really good player on a really good defense that holds a really high impact. My number 5 guy to start us off here, I had Xavier Watts at number 5. I'm banking on the athleticism. I'm banking on the ball skills being what helps him translate to being a great safety in the NFL. You had pointed out to me when we were texting about him that former receiver, it was his first time playing safety last year. So like the things that he's going to be good at showed up when they needed it to. he is horrendous in the run game. Not a great tackler. His angles are terrible.
He's shoddy at times.
His angles are terrible. His angles are some of the worst that I watched in the safety class. So, yeah, man, there's a lot of improvement that needs to go in there, but I think it's just him as an athlete. If he can be that good in coverage, I'm pretty excited by what he is just as a defensive player and what he could do maybe in a couple of years.
Great ball skills, like you said, right? He tied for the FBS lead with 7 interceptions this past year, and he was about as impactful as a pass coverage player as you're going to find in college football this past year. And the cool thing was, Joe, is you saw it in spurts in the run game, because you're right, it's well below average his impact in the run game right now. But then you turn on USC, and I know USC was easily his best game. It wasn't even close. But the best play of that day, in my opinion, Joe, because he had 2 interceptions in that game. He had a couple other pass breakups. He was dominant in the pass game. The play that showed me that Xavier Watts was there to play that day was when he tracked down Marshawn Lloyd along the sideline, and he absolutely obliterated the dude. And I think you were there, weren't you? Weren't you at the USC Notre Dame game this year? No, you were not.
No. I was at the Pitt game.
Okay. Yeah, almost the same result. Almost the same result also. But so he has flashes, but I think you hit on the key thing that we had talked about. This is a former 3-star player who started his career as a wide receiver, but it's not just a simple wide receiver to safety flop. He went from wide receiver to safety to wide receiver, and that second time he was playing receiver, he was also playing a little bit of safety, and then finally, before last season, they're like, all right, you're just a safety. Forget about wide receiver. This is your position. This is the first year you're going to start. And you saw the potential finally, right? I think it was about game 4, game 5 last year. It started to really to click for Xavier Watts as far as the player that he could be. So I'm interested to see just the improvements he takes from the little details, because I know he flirted with entering the NFL draft this past year. If he would have entered, I think he probably would have been a 4th round pick, somewhere in that ballpark. I'm interested to see if he can crack the top 100 and maybe even a little bit higher, but we'll see. Number 5, guy you already mentioned.
Yes.
Rod Moore, safety from Michigan, who is not going to be so actually I was looking at this up earlier, Joe. There's a chance he could play this year, but also he had a knee injury in the spring. So it's going to be a little bit iffy if we're going to see Rod Moore. And he's also only a 3rd-year player this year, so he could go back for another year and in general. So he might not even be a 2025 NFL draft prospect. But Joe, this kid's good, man. I was really impressed. I didn't know 100% what to expect from number 9, Rod Moore, but because he was a part of a 3-safety tandem with Keon Sabb that we mentioned, and then also Makari Page, who's he's an interesting player. I'll just leave interesting label for him. But I thought Rod Moore was the best mover of the crew. I thought he was really flexible. I thought he was really just general good foot quickness and really good anticipation. He's just a little bit more of a great athlete than a football player right now. So you're going to see more flashes than you are sustainability and great play from a game-to-game perspective. If he can get back healthy, whether it's 2024 season or 2025 season, I think he's got a chance to be not only a top 100 pick, but I wouldn't be shocked if he's a top 50 kid when all is said and done, man, because I think he has a lot of athletic upside, Mr. Moore from Michigan.
Yeah, it stinks how many of these guys seemingly have
injuries.
Have injuries
bad ones
that we're going to miss out on them.
It's too. Not easy ones.
Yeah. My number 4 was a guy that you had in your top 10, Xavier Watts from Iowa. Another guy that I fell in love with the traits, 6'2", 215 was what he's listed at Iowa. Overall, really like the range that he has for a guy of his size. The downhill tackling approach that he just has, not a super premier tackler, but just being downhill, willing to use his strength, willing to use his body as a tackler. And I thought in pass coverage, for how big he is, he's able to open up and eat up ground pretty quickly. I think that for him, why he translates is just more and more NFL teams are looking for these guys with these big bodies that are going to test really well. And I feel like he's going to test well at the NFL Combine. I'm not comparing him to Cole Bishop, but I think Cole Bishop's a good example where big body guy who's good against the run, despite his role not really being completely projectable in the NFL. The Bills took him relatively early where they drafted him.
So Xavier Watts, kind of what I was just talking about more from Michigan, Joe. Like, and correct me if you disagree on this, but like, I thought because he was a 5-star coming out of high school, Notre Dame was very high on his list. He ends up at Iowa for some certain reasons that I'm sure you could find on Google if you wanted to, but that's a conversation for a completely different podcast. Joe, he was a guy that would say was a 5-star athlete coming out of high school, but I wouldn't say he was a 5-star football player because I don't think he sees the game incredibly fast yet. He played the last game, started the bowl game 2 years ago, and then he was a full-time starter this past year for the first time. I just kind of want this kid to get more reps. I want him to get more live bullets because 6'2", 215, he moves exceptionally well. I mean, there's physicality there. He has a late third-round grade for me as safety 8. But this is one of those kids that I think could be a massive riser. Like if I looked at all the guys on my list, it'd be like Keon Sabb, it'd be like Xavier Nwankpa. Like those would be a couple of the guys that I would say who, if you ask me, who are the risers in this group potentially in 2025, those are the kids because they have untapped athletic potential that I think has a lot of upside to it.
Mm-hmm. Who do you got?
Number 4. Man, I need my cleaner transitions, man. What am I doing here tonight? A guy that I can guarantee.
That's on me more it is on you, but go ahead.
Well, we've been doing this long enough. We should be able to pick up those transitions together, but sure. Joe, I guarantee you haven't watched this player. Okay. Guarantee it. Would bet $1 million that you haven't watched this player. Emmanuel McNeil Warren, who is a safety from Toledo, Joseph. He is going to be a true junior this year. I hesitated to include him on the list because he was I think that I'm very early on that has been out to a couple agents already, but I did get it kind of okayed that I could talk about him in this presence. Okay. 6'2", 202 pounds. Shout out to Toledo, by the way, because they have been churning out defensive backs with Quinyon Mitchell, and they have another safety named Maxon Hook, who's probably going to get drafted this year as well. And I think that he is a very, very good football player in his own right, will be drafted on day 3 of the 2025 NFL draft. But Emmanuel McNeil Warren, who might not even be in this class, might not be. But Joe, a true sophomore last year, 69 total tackles, several interceptions, pass breakups. He was 6'2", 202, can move exceptionally well. Range of the back end is phenomenal. Power profile is there as well and continuing to develop. For only being a true sophomore, I stopped a late 2nd round grade on this buddy, man. Stopped the late 2nd.
Wow.
I think that Emmanuel McNeil Warren, whether we're talking about 2025 or 2026, that kid's a top 100 player. That kid's a top 75 player. He might be a top 50 player. I love this kid, man. He is very good from Toledo.
Yeah, talking about a deep poll.
Man, I love this kid, dude. I love this kid. Joe, I literally had my top 10 done, and then I remembered that I had all my stuff on Emmanuel McNeil, and I had to reach out to a couple people like, hey, I'm going to talk about this kid if it's okay. And it's okay. We're here. We're here, man. Emmanuel McNeil Warren Hive is live on the first team.
I'm juiced to track him because I'm curious to see where his progression goes, and I'm sure plenty of people will handle that very well. That you have a Toledo kid as high as you do. My number 3 that I have, Kevin Winston Jr., who we talked about on the pod, the Penn State safety, tall, long, great range. Thing with him that where he fits is that I think he's the type of guy that's great coverage for somebody to track tight ends, like the type of guy that you want in the box that's going to stick with. Stay step for step. Yeah. Right. And he did that a ton on film at Penn State this past year. Not super fluid hips, which kind of a little bit of a deficiency for him. Not like a super reactive, cerebral player. I think he's a big hitter, though. I think that he's willing to, or an aggressive hitter, and he's willing to use his body. Again, there's a little bit of a theme here. I keep returning to these big body safeties, and I think that he fits that description. The NFL loves these guys.
He's another kid that's like 6'2", 215, and he can fly, dude. Like, I agree. I don't think he's the most flexible athlete of all time as far as changing direction, but man, his explosiveness from point A to point B is mind-boggling, right? So I do have questions of like just overall impact and pass coverage as far as in deep zone coverage. I don't know if he's ever going to make a tremendous impact working from depth, But in short zones and playing some man-to-man against bigger body types that you illustrated and being a support player in the run game, yes, Kevin Winston is very good, which is why also Joseph, not to waste too much time, he's number 3 on my list as well. So we don't have to talk too much more about it, man. He's a very good football player. I like him a lot. I do think there might be some people that might be a little higher on him in the end, just based upon the height, weight, speed stuff. But I do think that this is a plus starter on the NFL level at safety.
Yeah, I know some people are kind of pushing him maybe as a late first rounder. Can't get totally all the way in there. Like, you got to be a super clean
second rounder
safety prospect to do that. I'm curious if you and I
don't know
both
who you
have
have
the
in
same...
here. I don't know who you have. Actually, I think I do, but we do not have the same guy at number 2. No chance.
Number 2. Okay. My number 2, and you don't have this guy in your top 10 then. My number 2, Andrew Makuba, who is now at Texas, who was previously at Clemson. I'm surprised that you didn't 13. Like him.
Joe, I have a 4th round grade on him. I like Andrew Makuba, but
man, I have a high 2 on him, man. I was really in love with watching this. Dude, his speed, his range, his acceleration, his hip fluidity, all of those things. And I thought his instincts were tremendous. I thought that his ability to cut down on gaps. Yeah, unbelievable. I don't know. I was blown away watching him. I think that there is really a lack of an impact at the run game because he's not a bigger safety. He's on the leaner side. He's not exactly coming down to deliver any big hits. But if I want somebody who's going to be a great coverage player over the top and could be above average starter in the NFL, I really like Makuba, man. I'm surprised that he wasn't in your top 10
so
at all.
Makuba, funny enough, it's kind of really interesting. When he was a sophomore, I think Keegan Renault was the one that put him up for cross checks and we put him through. So like, I feel like I was pretty early on Andrew Makuba a little bit, but I don't know, man. I don't see, I see good player. I don't see like impactful player though. Like that's, I guess what I'm missing with him. Like you know, he reminds me of, and this is a good comp for him. This is a good starting safety in NFL. He reminds me of John Johnson, who's played with like the Rams mostly, but I think he's been on another team as well. And I think he left them again this offseason. But like John Johnson is solid in every capacity, and he doesn't give up a lot of big plays. And he's a guy that makes the impact based upon being in the right spot from depth. Cool. It's great. But I would also say John Johnson has now been on 3 different football teams because while he's good, is he game-changing? Is he that guy that's just like transcendence? Like I just don't know if I see those things with an Andrew Makuba. I think that Andrew Makuba could be a starting safety potentially in the NFL, but I think he has a cap on just how dynamic he can be as an athlete. I just don't necessarily see that.
All right.
Number
Who's
2.
your number 2?
Dante Trader Jr. from Maryland, my friends. I am high on Dante Trader Jr. His buddy Bo Braid was a undrafted free agent that I think just made the Baltimore Ravens, if I remember correctly. But Dante is the much better athlete of that duo that we saw last year at the University of Maryland. Also, a dynamic lacrosse player as well, Joe. He also plays lacrosse for the University of Maryland. Plays lacrosse for Maryland. I think he's more of a, like, this isn't a Jordan Faison type of lacrosse player. This is more of a I'm on the lacrosse team because I'm good enough to be on the lacrosse team type of player, which is still nothing wrong with that. But this kid is 6'1", 190, 195 pounds, and he might be. I'm gonna not go too far here because we got a guy at number 1 that I think can do everything at an exceptional level. But Dante Trader Jr. might have the best fluidity working from depth in this class, an incredible range, man. And he's got pop in his pads as well. I honestly would like him to just kind of put down the lacrosse stick and just be like, hey, I'm full football, because he's got some 3rd round, 2nd round draftable grades around the NFL right now. And I'm in on Dante Trader Jr. I have a early 2nd round grade on him. Highest early 2nd round grade that you can get to, literally a 7.9 on the scale. This young man from Maryland has the goods.
Sadly, did not get eyes on him. I'm disappointed that
good player. You missed out.
God, that leaves us with Malachi Starks, who is both of our
Sanders?
number 1 safeties. Yeah, totally. Shallow Sanders. Malachi Starks, though, I have gone as far as to say that he is one of my highest graded players in this class. I mean, like he's in that special category.
He's number one for me. Yeah.
He's number 4 for me right now. But just to categorize him as rare coverage skills for a safety, rare athleticism for a safety, just able to cover from sideline to sideline. I really think, albeit he's not as big as Kyle Hamilton, I think a lot of teams are going to look at him and say, all right, if we have this opportunity to get our own version of him, a guy that can just play so many different roles, that can play in the box, that can play over the top, that can play down in the slot in coverage. He is the definition of multiplicitous, of just being able to do whatever you need him to do. It's hard to find a guy like this, and talk about transcendence. Yeah. He's the definition.
He is a player. He's rare. Okay. So he's a rare player in this class, which is why he's number 1 for me, an 8.8 on a 9-point scale for context there. So he has about as high as you can get on here. He's near a perfect safety prospect, in my opinion, which is wild to say. Never thought I would get to that point because I'm usually a very hard grader. But Joe, he's a player that if he was outside corner, I think he'd be a first rounder. If he was a safety, which he is, I think he'd be a first rounder. If he was a nickel only, I think he could be a first rounder. This kid is a special talent on the back end. He has a good frame. He's about 6'2", about 200 pounds, really fluid mover. Change of direction is great. Can come down in the box and has no issue there. Do I want his angles to be a little bit better, a little bit more crisp at times? Sure, but I can coach that stuff up. I can't coach the ball skills this kid has. Can't change the athleticism. I can't coach the athleticism this kid has. Can't coach the size and athletic profile that this kid has just in general. This kid is a rare football player. Kyle Hamilton was my highest graded safety ever. If Malachi Starks ended with the grade that I put on him in this preseason, if he ends with the same grade, which we'll see how he plays in 2024, this would be the highest graded safety that I've ever had. So Malachi Starks, special, elite, potentially generational. Like, he has all those things in front of him, in my opinion. I don't think it's hyperbolic to say that.
Insanely fun to watch. It's just such a silly thing to say about a prospect that they're fun, but definition of fun to watch. He's one of the guys that I'm excited to see what defensive coordinator takes him, and probably will get overthought during this draft process. At Joe DeLeone, at Rise and Draft. Hit the subscribe button, folks. Thanks for tuning in, and we're going to be back with the final position groups very soon.